Hello.
Hello.
There you are.
All right. Well, welcome to This American Dice, and now we are going to now that L5R Legend of the Five Rings Ryoko Owari City of Lies has finally finished August 20th. It and we've already talked about as players, like what we thought about it, players and myself as the GM, what we thought about the game. I figured David, you and I could talk about, as people who've run games many times, some big issues or kind of topics that come up that we face some challenges with,
And what we've learned along the way.
and what we've learned along the friends that we made along the way were the real treasure.
Yeah. And
Oh my God. I have diabetes according to this sample.
I've been eating asparagus according to this.
Yeah. Anyhow. But yeah, so one of the ones that I wanted to talk about is in the L5R game. Prior to when we're recording this, maybe 2 weeks ago, was the episode that Tayo, in which Tayo was killed. Your character was killed. Today's episode that just was published is where that mystery is totally solved. Of who killed Tayo, and also the big mystery that brought the new magistrates into the city to start with. But PC death is something that I wanted to talk with you about. So when player characters die, when it would be appropriate to have PCs die, how that should work, what that should look like in a game, and what it shouldn't look like. I didn't know if you had any thoughts. Or
yeah.
Bouncing sausages.
Bouncing sausages?
Yeah, Bouncing Sausages, my favorite band. They're Bouncing Souls cover band, but they just talk about meat products.
Yeah, PC death is pretty interesting. It's I think with like the dominant game like D&D, I think it's interesting. Like if you just look at the additions, it's like harder and harder for PCs to die. Probably for that chick track thing. If you remember.
Yeah, because you don't want that to happen. You don't want to go full Tom Hanks in Mazes and Monsters.
Absolutely. But yeah, I think it's like the I don't know. I don't want to speak for all of them, but it seems like the predominant like stance is like PC death is awful. It's terrible. Never do that to a player. But sometimes it can be really interesting. I thought I think before and here's where we can get into the suggestion thing. I think before the game started, you were kind of like, L5R is pretty dangerous. You guys could die if, like, you never know. And then I think around like a little bit before that happened, I think I told you, Tayo's maybe run his course. He might, if it ends up happening, like whatever. If I'm remembering correctly, or maybe that was earlier in the campaign.
Yeah, we definitely did have that conversation about Tayo, like how much more you could get out of that character, and to get not too into the nitty gritty of the L5R game, your character had been almost like so scared by this conspiracy and the various conspiracies around them that you were playing the character as like, oh, I can't leave the house. I have to just kind of sequester myself away to stay safe. I have to hide in my panic room with either Helen Hunt or Jodie Foster. I forget who was in that movie about panic rooms. But I wonder, is that part of the issue? Is it like, okay, well, it makes sense for a character to die when there's no realistic place else where they can go. Like there's no more development as a character. And I remember when people were reviewing the individual episodes of Game of Thrones, one of the jokes they made about Braun?
Yeah, Braun.
Yeah, Braun. Yeah. So was that when Braun chooses not to go after the gold and instead save Jaime Lannister from this dragon, it's like, oh, okay, he's no longer greedy. He's now possibly sacrificing himself for others. That guy's got a real ticking clock on his head for the rest of this show, because that's how it goes with these characters. He learned something, and now he's going to die. Do you think that that's a possible good place to say like, okay, it maybe is possible to kill this character because they've made their arc, they've transitioned from in some kind of way where now that we've seen them change in this way, we kind of got everything that we're going to get out of them.
Yeah, especially with like it might be a different kind of animal, the Powered by the Apocalypse games too,
Mm-hmm.
because you can only advance so far, and yeah, so it's I think it's and you change a lot each level, so it's like easier to make kind of a character arc out of that. And also many of the games, I think like L5R, this version of it might have been one of the ones that didn't. I kind of forget, but you also have the option of like change characters,
Mm-hmm.
which I think I don't know if I don't remember if I was toying with that or not, but both those would be like good options if you felt, your character kind of had that kind of, I don't know, satisfying conclusion, instead of just spinning wheels like Braun ended up doing in
Mm-hmm.
that show.
Yeah, because I think that, I mean, I would definitely say, and I think you would probably agree, and then I make a crazy, insane political statement. You'd probably agree with that, right? No, I think
Should
you'd
probably
probably
agree
agree
most
that,
of these
yeah,
politicians should be hanged. The
like I think you'd probably agree that like kind of random encounter-esque stuff in D&D is not the way to go usually with character death, where it was like, well, I rolled on the chart and it turns out you guys run into a troll and then that troll just clubbed you to death. That's probably not a good way to deal with character death, like with PCs. That you'd want it to mean something more than that. Do you think I'm summarizing your ideas well?
Yeah, I feel that's kind of tricky. I don't know if I would 100% agree with you. Mostly, but I feel like I mean, if we're going back to Game of Thrones too, like the just like the unsatisfying death can be kind of interesting depending on the setting too. I think that's a
Yeah.
lot of like genre and setting dependent.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, like with I think with L5R we were kind of setting it up like we established that it's based on a game that everyone's carrying, you know, razor like 3 foot long razor blades that could and you're made of oh, fleshy water balloon basically,
Mm-hmm.
and you could die at any point. So I had that in the back of my head, I think, throughout the whole thing. But yeah, if it's a yeah, okay. I'm trying to think of how I do agree with you to some extent too, especially based on the game because it's. I remember we had a game that I ran. One of the characters died because it was like, well, I don't want to deal with this wound. Just kill this character. I'm done.
Mm-hmm.
Which was maybe satisfying for them, but I remember I was like, oh, I have so many other things to happen. I feel the other players too are like, I was going to interact with this character in so many different ways. Kind of sucks that now that's not an option. So it's I guess it's kind of a like a conversation you should have based on it. It can be interesting, but I might you may have convinced me through myself discussing it, but yeah, for the story it can be really unsatisfying.
I could see within the story if part of the character's thing is like, oh, that Game of Thrones example again, using Braun as that example, like, oh, this character had been very, very selfish beforehand, or this character had been very risk averse, or this character had been like a coward or that kind of thing. And then in a random encounter with the troll that comes out of the forest, the troll is like absolutely beating to death the rest of the party, and then this character sacrifices themselves to do that. I think that could work out, but this leads me into another question about the same thing. When you're dealing with a character's death, do you think it is I don't want to say incumbent, I don't know if that's the right word, do you think it is like it's necessary for the person running the game, if it is a game that's run by somebody, to hand over a lot of the narrative to the person whose character is dying, to say like, okay, well, since this is the last time we're seeing this person and you were that person, you tell us how this goes?
Yeah, for sure. That's probably the way to do it. Either way. I
Okay.
think, yeah, I think that's a really good suggestion just in general. If you decide the lethality in this game is going to be, you know, up there.
Mhm.
When and if they any of these characters do die, I think it's yeah, that makes total sense. Just be like, well, based on this, you're gonna die, but how so?
Yeah.
And yeah, I guess it's sort of related to that. Like, it's always tricky to kind of balance the game and the I don't know the story dichotomy there.
Mhm.
Like, make a good story, but we're also playing a game. Like, we're not just around a campfire doing a thing. So it's if you and I don't like if people do this, that's their own game, that's fine. But for me, it's you're almost taking some of the fun out of it if it's just like we're not really going to use the game or
Mhm.
we're going to ignore the game in this particular way because, like, for instance, you can't die in this D&D campaign. Don't worry about it. Don't even worry about hit points or whatever. We're going to ignore that aspect. It makes it less I don't know, interesting or like exciting for me and maybe some other people,
Hmm.
if that
Because
makes sense.
yeah, I in regard to the L5R game, one of the things I ran into with both Tone's character Aji and Andrew's character Yugure was that both of them were regularly getting the shit beaten out of them, like a lot. Like Yugure was going to be like sacrificed basically to by the Moon Cult. Later on, Aji got in a duel where he should have died, and that stuff happened pretty regularly. And at some point, I know in a lot of certainly like superhero type stuff, and in lots of TV dramas and movies, like the main characters are the main characters, and so they withstand things that a normal person probably would not be able to at all, or certainly not recover from easily, and yet they do. Uh, I ran into several times like, okay, how do I? And I guess this is the next big thing. When you're in a situation where it really makes sense that this character just straight up die, how do you find a good way to either like kind of bend the river around that particular issue and not have it seem so blatant of like, oh well, in a James Bond movie, James Bond doesn't die, duh, kind of a thing. Or how do you or and when slash how do you just say like this character should die, how do we best do this? And I ran into that problem a lot in this L5R game because, like I said, there would be times where honestly it would have been probably more. It certainly would have been more interesting at times for some of those characters to have just died and then other people to come in.
Yeah, I think in this one, this is coming back to me now. Like a few of these near death experiences
Mm-hmm.
could, in hindsight, have been more interesting that way for sure. I think the way I would or have or would suggest other people to do it at least is to yeah, just throw it to the player like you were kind of getting at before. Like, I think that's probably, if I remember correctly, how you did it with Tayo too. Like, wow, you're probably going to die here, right? Do you think there's a way out of here, or do you think this is like the end? And
Mm-hmm.
if the character or the player rather is like, yeah, I think you're probably right, like giving the final say to them, I guess, the veto
Mm-hmm.
power, I guess.
Okay, so do you think that's an important thing? Is that the player essentially have veto power over that?
Um, yeah, I mean, we're making fun of that chick track thing, but
Mm-hmm.
it kind of to some degree is sort of true. Like, a lot of people do get really attached to some of these characters, especially when you play like a longer game. Like this one was really long. Um, like, I was sad to see Tayo go. Um, there's a like an emotional response to it if you want it to or not. So I would probably err on the side of caution there. Like, is it okay? I'm not just taking away this beloved character you sunk all these hours into.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, if it's well, I think Apocalypse World 2 has a lot of fail safes with that. I think did they have like a scar thing? Like, You can come back, but a stats -1 or something.
Yeah, I know Apocalypse World has that. The L5R game had that. Dungeon World doesn't, but it's far, far easier to heal in Dungeon World.
Oh, and they have
And
resurrection spells and such too.
yeah, that kind of stuff is very, very common. That was the thing in the L5R game that I wanted that realism to be there, and I wanted the harm to have consequences. So I didn't let you guys heal very regularly. But the thing that I regret was that essentially just meant that there was this number sitting there on the sheet, and that didn't mean very much. Andrew, I think, embraced it a bit, where he was like, oh, my character now walks around with a cane. He seems like he's been injured. He seems more frail. But essentially my attempt to make things more realistic and more deadly, given that you were in these violent circumstances regularly, I feel kind of fell flat. And all it meant was that you guys were sitting around with these numbers, and we just had to more often encounter these like, oh, well, you should have died, but instead, actually.
Yeah.
So that's
again,
a regret of mine to a certain degree.
Like way easier to say in hindsight, but yeah, I guess if someone was at, 4 out of 5 harm for like a session or two, like that could have been an opportunity to be like, hey, Brandon or whomever, do you think your character? Do you want your character to die? Because these wounds are pretty serious. What are you open to that, or should we? What should we do here?
Yeah. All right. So, like so much else in this, I guess in the end it comes down to it's a conversation between the players and the GM.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Probably every problem is solved.
It's really that. Yeah.
But yeah, I didn't think of that at the time, but now very easy to say.
Yeah, and I've run into that. I do like in some of the other games that there are almost mechanics to be like, well, I guess it is there in those Powered by the Apocalypse games, of that there's a mechanic to say like, actually, I was supposed to die, but I dodged that bullet at the last minute, or I got super, super injured, but somehow I pull through because I did blah, blah, blah. And I like that because it gives a mechanic aspect that if this keeps going on, I think like if you've had to lower every stat, but I think Andrew and Tone's characters both had to lower like at least 2 or 3 of their 5 stats because they just kept getting killed. Andrew had a roof collapse on him. He was like sacrificed by a moon cult, and all kinds of crazy shit happened to him.
Yeah, and now after the fact, I feel like I kind of regret having Tayo die like so soon, like so close to the end. I think it was like only a handful of episodes after.
Yeah, there are 4 more episodes after today, since today's episode was published. There's 4 more episodes, and Tayo died 2 ago. So there are a total of 6 episodes.
That's probably like 2 or 3 sessions after.
Yeah, and I think even Tayo died possibly in the middle of that game session. And so then like some of the stuff from one of the episodes that came out was just the second half of the game session of like, all right, well, Tayo's dead. Yeah, but you think that dying that late in things was kind of shitty?
Now I sort of regret only that part of it. I was like, man, now that everything's kind of coming, like wrapping up, I like if only Tayo were there. But I think it was still yeah, like I think there's like in the epilogue and everything, we did touch on the twins and everything.
Yeah, we did. Ooh, throat made a gross noise. All right. Well, our next topic, if you're down,
I was going to ask you real fast before we move on. Although we've probably spent too much on this topic already, but have you ever had any characters that you were playing die that were memorable to you, or and if so, were they handled well or poorly?
You ran a SCUP game. It was the same game that you referenced before where a character got injured and the player just didn't want to deal with it. And so they were like, I'll just have the character die. It doesn't matter. But I think they just weren't really interested in playing.
Yeah.
In that same game where I was very interested in playing, I, at the very end of the game, chose to have my character die. But that was like a choice I made. I was like, oh, I'll retire my character to safety, basically just so I can narrate their death. And like, here's how that goes. So I kind of took it upon myself for that character to die in that way.
The safety of oblivion.
Yeah.
Yeah, I sort of remember that now.
And I thought that was good. I wish I had actually done that a little bit earlier, so that way it made more of an impact. Because when we played it, I narrated it at the very, very, like in the very last couple moments of the last session. And so it was like, okay, I narrated this. And then we just moved into epilogues, and it's like, well, essentially everybody got to do the thing that I was doing.
Yeah.
I remember other games where a character died. Honestly, no. I don't think any game I've had a character like in the middle of stuff die.
Yeah, I couldn't.
And I'd like to think I'd be more okay with it. And I'm trying to think what I'd want for myself to be okay with it. And I think that issue of like, okay, since this character is going away, there should be an element of narrative control that's handed over to me. Since I'm saying this character's going away, this should be a big moment. Here's how it is a big moment. So I think that's probably the way to do that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And actually, you said something that makes me want to clarify too. I feel if I had the choice, I would probably kill Tayo earlier, like instead of not at all. I was like, wait, am I saying like? Hopefully, it's not coming across like, well, I only killed him like right at the end. What's the problem?
No, I think that came across that if you had killed him off, that if Tayo had died earlier, it would have pushed some of those things that we ran into and were like kind of kickstarted by Tayo's death. I think it would have maybe kicked that into higher gear and either made the game shorter, which I don't think would have been bad, or maybe just like allowed for more information to come out, because your next character, Asako Anjo, came in at a very different level of like information.
Yeah.
And like, okay, I'm involved with one of these conspiracies and I know what's going on. And so since I know what's going on, I kind of already have these answers to these things and can connect more of these dots. So that would have been interesting to see.
Yeah, changing characters was definitely interesting for me, or fun to do. Although another practical thing is my first choice was that witch hunter guy, Kuni Renyo. Yeah. But I think he died like the session before Tayo did. I'm like, damn it.
Yeah, he died very shortly before Tayo died. And then who was the other character that you said you were kind of interested in?
I don't know. Oh, I think maybe the duelist guy.
Maybe
I remember I was considering him.
That would have been super interesting, but
I was like, 2 scorpions. No way.
Yeah, that's true. Well, speaking of duelists, one of the things that we ran into with that game was character investment and character drives. And I think that
I guess that's a transition.
Yeah, well, our resident duelist was a character who often seemed to lack a lot of drive. I, as the person running the game, ran into problems with motivating Tone's character to get him to do stuff. The good thing was I felt he was the most amenable to hard framing scenes of you're here and doing this thing, and he'd kind of go along with it, no problem. But part of that seemed like he didn't necessarily have a strong motivation for the character, so plopping him down into any of these scenes was fine. Andrew's character, Yugure, on the other hand, did have some motivations, but sometimes motivating him into a particular direction and getting him involved with things seemed difficult. And so we ran into, I guess maybe it's less of a matter of motivation, but direction, where it'd be like, okay, what are you doing? I'm going to wander around the city and just look around. Like, okay, that's not unreasonable. That's not insane.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it's not super. It would be weird if in a movie, so many elements of the character discovering stuff was them being like, I'm just going to take a walk, and them just walking around the city and then something running into them. Like, that does happen. That's basically how every Law and Order starts.
I was gonna say that's a big thing in like like film noir stuff, like the protagonist Gumshoe or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like, well, I'm just a hapless idiot, just wandering around drunk, and then stuff happens to them.
Yeah,
it's kind of a hallmark of that.
Yeah,
I don't know if Yugure can be described as a film noir character, but
yeah. But I think motivating some of those characters at times was tough.
Yeah, I think Yugure too was a really interesting character, but he was set up as I think Andrew kind of I don't know, thought of him originally as
well, hold on, let's get him on the line. Hold on, Andrew, come on in. It didn't work.
No. But yeah, he kind of, I think, thought of him as like a monk at first, and you're like, don't do a monk though. And he kind of did monk by way of Shugenja.
Yeah.
And so it was, I think, probably the problems or the maybe concerns you had with someone playing a monk kind of came out. Possibly, it's like, I'm more focused inwardly. I'm more like I don't know, like turtling. Like, I don't want to make decisions kind of character. He was playing it well, but like it's not super easy to have that player in there. And I think to be fair too, I think by the end when Tayo got really paranoid about everything, I was definitely doing the turtling thing too. And in hindsight, again, it's like that was a bad decision for a player character to have or mindset to have.
I think, and we've run into this problem with characters. I think we ran into this problem with Yugure long ago when we had played L5R with some folks. That very long game that I ran, where I ran the Bells of the Dead module, that L5R game years and years back.
Oh yeah. The Monkey Clan one.
Yeah. And then I ran into the same problem with folks years, like in high school when we were playing a Vampire the Masquerade game. You'll have a character who theoretically has this worldview or this vision. And I think I talked to Sean Nittner and I forget who else the co-host of that episode was, but this was one of the things I talked about on narrative control, was the idea of like motivating characters.
Jim Cocker or something like that. Was that him? Or is that someone else?
I don't know.
Anyway, another person.
Yeah. But one of the things we would run into was a character who's like, I'm all about, like, I'm a samurai, but I'm really out there to help. We ran into this problem in that like Bells of the Dead game. I'm a samurai, but I'm really there about helping like common people. I'm this ascetic monk almost who, like, yeah, they're from the samurai caste, but they're interested in helping the common people and being more like the common people, and kind of trying to push them to act on that, and them not acting on those motivations that they theoretically have. Andrew would often have in this game, I felt like certain ways to go, and it was tough to get him to sometimes go in those directions. A good thing that I think he did was he often would recognize it, where he'd be like, yeah, Yugure doesn't like that, but he's going to let it go.
Mm-hmm.
Like he would say that kind of thing of like, oh, well, that shouldn't happen, but all right, it's gonna. And so I appreciated that he at least recognized it. I ran into that kind of stuff in the past with the Vampire game, where since Vampire has that system of humanity, that there was a character who was very, very into the idea of being human and holding on to as much of that humanity as possible. But then they did the same stupid shit that everybody does in those Vampire games, where it's like, hold on, I get my trench coat and I have my 2 sawed-off shotguns and I go into the the place and I shoot everybody, and you're like, okay, well, that doesn't really jive with what's going on when you're acting like a fucking Sylvester Stallone character in the beginning of Cobra. So that's always been a thing that's bugged me. And like, how do you motivate somebody to kind of take their character's premise or idea and put it into action in a way that moves the story?
Yeah. And I think the advice I would give here is that it's more of a player facing problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I won't shit on you for one segment at least, Austin.
Okay.
Although you're not off the hook though, because I remember in Demi-Humans, I think I kind of had this problem with you too, with your dwarf character.
Yeah, and actually,
Kane.
one of the other things that I have, the divergence between GM and player vision, is specifically one of the things I was thinking of. Yeah, but yeah. You're good.
But yeah, I think so. My advice to players too, and I messed this up in the L5R thing too, which I'll get into in a second. But to have like a really strong drive or motivation going into it. Like I have this. Oh, hold on.
Sorry, I was just checking to see how.
Hey.
Anyways, the food's done.
Okay.
Do you want me to just take the dog out then?
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
What was I saying?
About Tane.
Oh, yeah.
Player facing stuff.
Yeah. It's really important to have for players like starting or making a new character to like have a drive. A lot of like systems do this. I know what the Burning Wheel's famous for it, I think. But it's really good to have in general. Like just have like a really strong motivation or something that you're trying to attain, or like a goal to like you're trying to accomplish this goal. Because I think going back to Tayo, I think I had this game was a while ago, but I think I had his thing just to get more power in the city.
Mm-hmm.
And not be exposed, like the secret exposed. And then later it kind of shifted into I've got to protect my family. And while protecting family is like interesting, sort of, I feel like for the game it was kind of bad, because like I was kind of hinting at earlier, kind of made Tayo just like turtle up and just be paranoid and just like, well, I'm not going to do anything then. I'm not going to leave the house or fight anything or deal with any plot happening in this entire city. And looking back, like that was dumb. Like it made logical sense. So that's kind of why it was maybe time for Tayo to go, but not the best like dynamic drive to pick, because you got to pick them carefully. Like what will make the most interesting story or get me this character to being involved in as many things as possible, I guess.
Do you think those motivations or character motivations or drives should almost always like require or necessitate some kind of external action, rather than just like, oh, I can go off and do this on my own? Like as I'm saying it, I'm already finding a million exceptions to it, but like a thing that you can't, like, for instance, I want to protect my family or keep my family safe, is often a more reactive thing. Of, well, when things start out, there doesn't seem to be a ton of danger for you or your family. Like, okay, well, so then the matter's not very important, and then you're just kind of like shrinking in, like you had said. So if it's more, should it have to be more proactive than reactive?
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. Like make really proactive drives or motivations to get you out of the house to actually play this game.
Yeah, true enough. Yeah, we could all use to get out of the house more often.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, I think Tayo by the end, when I shift it, because like I guess reiterating again, just like at first Tayo was like, I'm gonna become the kingpin of the city. I'm gonna get as much power, get all the riches, and be great. And then shift it to, well, my family's in danger. I can't let anything happen. And Yeah, I think it definitely would have benefited, like it, because when you have a clear kind of goal that you're looking for, it'll make you. It's easier to role play that and make decisions based on that instead of just I don't know, roll the dice to see which door I take. I don't care.
Yeah.
Which that's like a pet peeve of mine. Austin definitely knows. I'm like,
Yes.
don't roll the dice to make a character decision. Just pick what's more interesting. God damn
Right.
it.
Yeah. Yeah, we've given people problems about that before. Okay. Yeah, those character motivations can be tough. And I think you also have to come into, especially if you're playing with like, I almost said a mixed group, but that doesn't quite mean anything. I was going to say like people who have maybe different role-playing game experiences or different gaming experiences. And so if you're playing with a group who maybe doesn't think about it as like a story thing first, these games haven't come out yet, but the game that we played with my cousins, like the motivations that they had for stuff were very, very different than the motivations you usually have for a character. When I played with some of the Bradenton guys and my neighbor, which is another game that'll come out in a long while, that was another thing of like, well, when you have a characters who don't have really strong motivations that are already there, getting some of that kind of better information about them and their character can be tough. And so maybe setting that standard earlier on. We played an Apocalypse World game that I ran long, long ago, the Drown Town game that was like Orlando, but in Waterworld, Orlando. And at the very end, I was trying to wrap things up. And with one of the characters, I was like, oh, this is a character you had said was an enemy of yours. What did you really do to, like, we've been hinting at, like, you had wronged this person or they're after you. What did you do to make them do this? And I remember they had the player had just such a flippant thing of like, I don't know, they liked a girl and I was there instead of them or something like that. Like they had such a very, it seems so minor that it was like, oh, they kind of treated it very flippantly. And their whole goal was like, oh, this shouldn't be a big thing. But I remember trying to continually push this character. What was the real answer? But maybe that should just go on early on of like, you know, have these motivations, like try to come up with these things early on. They don't have to be super defined. They can be very broad, but that way, when you're in a situation where it's like you don't have any clues, you don't know what to do next, you always have a go-to thing of, well, my thing here is I'm a greedy businessman who wants to expand their business. So I'm going to try to do that. Like I'm calling up the radio station and buying ad time on the radio. That might be a little thing, but like, okay, you're doing it. Or I'm going to try to call up this company and merge with them, that kind of deal. So yeah. I think that could probably work.
Yeah, so I think drives for sure are the big suggestion for players, especially. But I think too, like on the GM side, like the other thing to kind of encourage investment, you know, is to get like collaboration. You know, like I was, what reminded me of it was when I brought up that Monkey Clan thing. Like the backstory of that is we played this L5R thing for a long time. And at some point I got in my head, like, all right, you know, what would be the coolest thing ever is to make a whole new clan. And I got way too excited about it. And you were running from another module and you're like, David, goddamn, we're not doing this Monkey Clan thing. Can we just finish this story now?
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, we got to do this thing. I'm really excited about it. So that's a bad example of it. But a better example is kind of like what you were saying a little bit before, like with your like the example of that player who was, how did you reconcile with this other NPC or something? Just like asking a lot of questions and like noting them down and like bringing them back, because you're I think just it's a human being thing. Any story idea that you suggest that comes back later that people reincorporate, you're just instantly going to be more invested than you would be normally, which is really tricky playing from a module like you were here. There's not as many opportunities to have that kind of stuff as you normally would probably.
Okay. Well, is that a segue to skip over one of our questions and get into running stuff from a module?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
That makes sense.
So this game, as we probably already said in the debrief, we used a Powered by the Apocalypse World system in part because it would be quicker for everybody to learn the game. And we had previously, I'm most familiar with L5R 2nd edition, and the module that we were using, the Ryoko Owari the City of Lies module from 1998, mostly by Greg Stolz, was written for the first edition of L5R. So already there's some translation. But aside from just the game issues and the system that we used, I think some of the stuff in the module we ran into some issues with, but I'll let you hop in here about that.
Oh, and to be fair, I think we started soon after the newer edition, the Fantasy Flight one came out.
Yes, and we even tried that briefly.
Yeah, we made character. We spent like an entire afternoon making characters, and after that, we kind of all looked at each other, and it's like, this game doesn't sound fun. Let's not do that.
It would.
Maybe I'm being biased, but I was like, this game does not seem exciting to me.
Well, I will say my opinion of that system was it was going to require it would require all of us to learn it. So one of the bad things about it was it wasn't even like the L5R 2nd edition where I could be like, oh, here's how you do this and explain it. None of us knew it. Mm-hmm. So all of us coming in trying to learn this system at the same time, while it puts us on a level playing field, it also means no one can assist anyone else.
Yeah. But yeah, so how'd you feel about was this the first time you ran that module? Didn't you start to run it before or something?
I had run a version of this back in high school with some of my buddies from Bradenton. And one of the things we ran into with this is, first of all, the Ryoko Owari or the City of Lies box set is set up as a sandbox game. And in that capacity, I remember when I first got this when I was like 16 or 17 years old, I thought it was brilliant. I was amazed at how much work went into it. There are so many different NPCs. The NPCs have different motivations. They have secrets. They have all these things about them. There's like the world itself. There's these different neighborhoods with these different characteristics. And then there are these plot hooks that are little things like, like there's an ogre spotted out in the countryside, and like the magistrates hear about it, but they also realize that other people in town have heard about it and they want to go stop this ogre, and because it would be like a boon for them to be the ones who defeated this ogre, and so there becomes this race to be the first one to defeat it. Mm-hmm. Let alone plus then actually fighting it is difficult too. So there's all these things that were in there, plus the big conflict between the opium cartels that we're still dealing with. Well, we've pretty much wrapped that up basically in the game. Plus, like the conflict with the opium cartels was there and was this really detailed story that I was just fascinated by. And I remember running it in high school, and we ran into this problem of I would just keep throwing things at them to the point where it was like, okay, when you think about it, it's probably day 5 that you've been in Ryoko Owari as the new magistrates, and it's day 5, and you've already encountered 17 different adventure prompts. And and I did some of this. I had some of the same problems where I tried to make things too subtle. I tried to like give little clues here and there that would eventually lead to something, and they never did because we ran out of patience and ran out of time. Mm-hmm. So when we're doing this, I was really excited to do that as having more experience, but I think there were some hiccups to say the least.
Yeah, so it was mostly you kind of focus on the opium war stuff, right?
Yeah, my game plan had been once we hit between session 8, 9, or 10, I would introduce the start of the Opium War stuff. And so the first thing with that is when that opium warehouse gets robbed. And I think I waited till 12 or 13 to do it, which I think was a mistake. But then it also kept dragging and dragging and dragging. So I waited longer than I should have to really have the big story kick in. So that's a regret.
Yeah, right. So I've run a few of these like recent ones, which will come out in the future from modules too. And I feel almost like I'm running into that same problem. Like I'm introducing stuff way too late. I think maybe with I don't know if it's a module specific piece of advice or just in general, or maybe just how we run, the two of us run games, but I would like try to front load as much as possible, maybe as the suggestion I would give, like what you just said more or less. But I have fallen into that same trap, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
I think a thing that could come out and be useful also is to discuss like what is the kind of game that this module is set up to be. And so within L5R, within the Ryoko Owari game, it's basically like it's samurai detectives going samurai detectives in a super corrupt city. And I think I tried to make that part pretty clear. And early on, you gave like Andrew as an example, and Andrew was like, oh, I should be a monk. And I was like, that's not going to work out because you're supposed to be detectives. If you're a monk, that's not really going to work super well. And I think I said, like, if that's all you're interested in doing, we can force it to work and figure a way to make it work. But it really, that doesn't make a ton of sense.
I think Tone's original concept was he only wanted to be a chef, right?
Yeah, he initially had said, oh, I'm going to be a chef. I'm going to be a cook. And that came up, I think, a whopping one time in the whole game where he had wanted to be a chef or wanted to be a cook. And it came up from something I wrote in rather than him ever bringing it up. But
oh, really? It's funny.
Yeah. But that's an example of like, that wouldn't really fit with what was going on. Similarly, within that part of that game was supposed to be like dealing with corruption. And so one of the good things was that we had Tayo, who became kind of the insider with the cartels. Like Tayo was kind of the dirty cop working with the cartels. And so we got to see a lot more. In previous games that I'd played in high school, I played a version of that where we were using this module and no one was interested in being the dirty cop. So since no one was interested in doing that, there was all this stuff that we never saw. We never saw the inner workings of the cartels because, you know, the magistrates were always the opponent of the cartels. So figuring that stuff out was super, super tough. So I think what kind of module this is and what kind of story you're trying to run really needs to be discussed beforehand, because otherwise you can kind of flounder around a little too much. And given that that is supposed to be a sandbox setup where you can just wander around and encounter all of this shit all over the place, it's almost more open to that of like, oh, well, I have another idea for this character that really would work in a slightly different version. Like that, it could change stuff up.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think, kind of general suggestions about running a module that I've kind of learned is that, like it's, for me, it's, getting back to what I was saying, like the, I forget what I said before, but the, like getting player buy-in, to kind of make motivation and investment happen. Like it's important to kind of see the modules as almost like a, I don't know, like an outline, and be ready and excited about changing it however you need to. Like I remember the upcoming Dungeon World module that we did went off like really fast, like differently than what the module was supposed to be doing. And the other module I'm doing now, the D&D one, is more or less stayed the same, but I think at any moment it can veer off pretty, significantly. But I know you said we veered off pretty significantly from the module 2, right?
Yeah, I think in the debrief we talk about this, how the game had, while the module really, really heavily encouraged that, like, oh, the opium cartels are going to try to get a magistrate on their like payroll and try to get like a inside man when it comes to the magistrates. And the entire opium war storyline, that big conflict, does not account for what if one of the characters is their inside man. I think in a more traditional system that maybe could have worked differently, where I could have said like, okay, well, all of the cartels are so scared that they're nervous about you as their inside man, and so they're boxing you out. And so because they're all superhumans, like when you roll, like it would be incredibly difficult for you to convince them to open up. But since we were using a Powered by the Apocalypse system, you could more easily get them to talk to you. Yeah. But I think that aspect of like using a module, being willing to change it, I do think is pretty important. For sure. Like not being so married to it. And that's a regret that I have, was being as married to some of the stuff. I said, once we get to this point in this game, for us, it was when the Bayushi warehouse is burned down. And in the module, they are basically like, oh, Bayushi Korchika, the head of the Bayushi cartel, will probably die. Well, my thought was like, well, once that happens, really the rest of this plot kind of like spirals through, and I'm fine to let it conclude however it concludes. But until that point, I was kind of nervous about relinquishing a lot of control, because my thought was like, well, I have this cool story and I really want to get to it. But that comes down to that like idea of like sharing what's going on and sharing that control. And having a module can sometimes feel like I don't want to say a crutch. It can actually sometimes be restrictive, because you think, oh, well, here's this thing. It's printed out. I have to get to it. It's so amazing. But you can do other things. You are not at all required to follow that. And it even fucking says so in the modules and in those things. And so that would be my suggestion there, is like, don't be afraid to veer off from that. I thought it was interesting often when we did veer off from that stuff, but you can, if you think that the module has a specific tone and a specific feel, you can try to hold on to that and talk with your players about like, I'm fine with you guys really throwing a wrench in the works, but if this is a film noir, does it really make sense that this happens? Like, maybe that doesn't work out. Maybe this doesn't make sense. And I think you could kind of talk that stuff through.
Hey, that's a pretty good, possibly accidental transition to one of the other topics.
To which one?
The one we skipped.
To divergence between GM and player vision?
Yeah, or setting expectations, I was thinking specifically, but yeah, probably.
Okay.
Depending on what you mean by that. Let's see.
Huh. With this one, I had it was less of a thought in regard to the L5R game and just other stuff that we've run into. there were little things in the L5R game that I didn't want to get into too much. Whether it was because it was too related to like the specifics of the setting. But every now and again, I'll find as a player or as somebody running stuff that myself and the other person aren't seeing eye to eye with what's going on. One of the things I'll find with that is like sometimes hard framing scenes can be rough, because if you hard frame a scene for a character and say, okay, you're here and this is going on. And if the player isn't really so into that, if they're kind of like, well, why would I really be doing that? Or I don't kind of think I'd be into it as much. That can be tough. And it can be tough to, as a player, really want to shoot down the other person's idea. There were a few times in our Demi-Humans game where you like kind of had a setup for what was going on. And I was like, I don't think Tane, like I understand that this would get Tane to do something, but I don't feel that that's the thing that best fits with this character or that best fits with this world. There were other times where I could tell that I would set up something with one of the players in the L5R game, and they would feel like, okay, well, how do I kind of quickly, it would seem like they were trying to quickly get out of that scene and kind of like make it end quickly. Or they felt like, okay, well, I'm obliged to play this through, but I don't have a connection to it myself. So they then became very passive. And so not a lot would happen. Yeah. So I'm wondering about how you run, what your thoughts are on that stuff of when you have an idea for a player's character and where they fit into this stuff, but the player does not feel that that's necessarily where their character should be or what they would do. And so like where that kind of dissonance, like how to deal with that.
Oh, yes.
Checking.
Okay. Yeah, I guess we should probably wrap up pretty soon.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. Well, see, as a player, I kind of love getting hard framed into things most of the time, because you kind of have to, almost like do the gymnastics of, oh, why did my character be here? What's happening? And like that's usually pretty fun to do for me. But yeah, if I were a GM and kind of people were pushing back on me, I think I guess there's like some room for negotiation there, right? Like, you're at a strip club. It's like, well, I am a grandma, and I don't think I would really be really into going here. My character, maybe, oh well, maybe you're a sizzler then.
Mm-hmm. That exact thing did come up just recently.
Yeah. But yeah, I guess I can see how, if it's something like just a wildly different view of what you think your character would be, if you're hard framed into that, it would be like I said, it's like fun to do the gymnastics of figuring it out. But if it's just something that's just like, this is 180 degrees what I picture my character being like, I guess that would be like a different conversation too. Like, I don't think you really understand the character like I do. Or what if it's like this instead of like this? I guess this might be the default. Role-playing games are a conversation.
Yeah. And I think that almost relates to just kind of interpersonal relations of, providing maybe a suggestion. Like, what if it was something that's close to what you're saying, but different, as opposed to just saying, I wouldn't do that. And I can remember in high school playing a game with a character who the game took place on this, like we made our characters beforehand for this D&D game. And then afterwards it was like, okay, you're on this ship and this ship is blah, blah, blah. And one of the guys was like, why my character wouldn't be here? This doesn't make any sense at all. And I was like, okay. And I understood that then. And it wasn't until later when Lee had a game that he ran And he basically said, like, this is the premise of the game. So if you make a character, make sure they're okay with it, because otherwise they, if you're like, all right, in the movie Fargo, all the characters who are like, I would never live in Fargo. In fact, I live super far away.
Yeah.
They're not in the movie. Like, yeah, all those characters you never encounter.
Mhm.
They're arguably not characters in the film. But so that kind of like connection there. So I do think that I think you've got a good point of maybe try to have that discussion if what someone's proposing diverges from what you're saying, and maybe don't, as tough as it can be sometimes to kind of put up a roadblock or a speed bump, maybe don't be afraid to say, like, to reiterate what the point of your character is or what the motivation of your character is, and question some stuff of why this might be, because I think that could actually work out better almost in like the internal monologues that we've talked about in some games.
Yeah.
Of, well, why is this character going here? And if you talk it out, that can be kind of a useful thing of like, oh, so you're really going here maybe to do this. You're really going here not because you think that there's a clue, but you're really going to this strip club because you're fed up.
Mhm.
And you don't think you'll find anything here. You're going here because you're like, you know what? I'm done. I'm just going to go to this place where I can blow off steam, basically.
Yeah. And
that strip club, by the way, would be called the Whistle Stop, and it would have a steam whistle theme.
Well, naturally.
Yes.
But yeah, I did want to. There's a couple like widely used role playing tools that are pretty good for this. Like kind of the if someone hard frames you in a scene that is like, my character definitely wouldn't do that. I feel that's like an okay use of like the X card situation.
Mm-hmm.
Like usually it's used for like something really uncomfortable, and I don't like this kind of thing. Like, is its main purpose, but I feel you can also get a lot of use out of like, I got to X card that. This like breaks the tone of what I'm thinking of my character. Yeah. Like that's an okay use for it too. Like definitely a good tool for that. And I'm sure we've explained the X card 100 times, but just like, don't do this. Basically, let's stop and talk about it.
Yeah,
that's what X card's for.
That's a good point of like kind of breaking the tone of what's going on is also, or following with the tone is also an aspect of like the social contract of the table.
Yeah, it kind of like takes like we did this in the also forthcoming Avatar game a lot, but like taking a step up, I guess, or step back, and it's like, okay, we're not in the actors room now, we're in the writers room, and how can we figure this out? Like, let's talk about it as writers instead of the characters themselves, That's one good tool for that kind of stuff. And also the other tool, CATS, like the acronym. So this is good to do at the beginning of any new campaign, or even like one shots and stuff sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
I try to do it all the time, but sometimes I don't.
You try to be jellical when you can.
Absolutely. We all should. But yeah, it stands for concept, aim, tone, and subject matter. Like just going over those 4 things, like this is a good exercise. Like what would you present CATS as for L5R? You're restarting it. For
the concepts,
the reboot.
Sin City Samurai Detectives.
Yeah.
So there's the concept.
Perfect.
And then what's the next one?
What would be the aim? Yeah. Like, why is this fun to play?
Why is this fun to play? Yeah, that's a tough. Anyone who's listened will tell you that's a tough one.
How dare you?
Yeah. Why is this fun to play? What's the goal here? What's our aim? Probably
or like what kind of emotions are you trying to elicit, or
and that comes out of the aim, or does that come out of the tone?
I think that's kind of the aim, right?
Huh.
I mean, you can interpret that however.
Okay, so I think you're trying to like unravel mysteries. That's one of the big things. You're trying to deal with like corruption in this society that has a very different setup from our own. So, and trying to experience kind of the crime drama type of thing, like I said, in a society that's very different from our own.
Yeah,
Like
that makes sense.
feudal Japanese detective is going to work out very, very different from like Law and Order.
Yeah. And then tone is I kind of view that as what are some like genres that kind of apply, or like also like what rating would you give this if it's a movie, and like is it jokey or not?
Mm-hmm.
Is it more serious, that kind of stuff?
I would, for the L5R game, I think we had a hard time with that at times. I remember
Mhm.
with that game that we ran, that Dungeon World game where you guys were fighting against the people who thought the Earth was round.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things we discussed was that it should be kind of a hard PG-13 kind of thing, and that it should be a lot like old 80s and 90s sword and sorcery kind of stuff. And I even showed that like Core Goth of Barbaria cartoon, or I sent like a link out to that of like, okay, watch this. It should be something like this, where it's kind of nuts and a little bit over the top, but not body horror-y or like torture porn. Like, so
Right.
while it could be crazily violent, that violence is like cartoonish at times.
Yeah. In the second episode or session, I think everyone was peeing on each other, if I remember correctly.
There was a lot of urine. Yeah, a golden opportunity there. And then subject matter. So is the subject matter more like the specifics of the game?
Yeah, so how I understand it, it's mostly is there anything that could be offensive to people, like that you should watch out for, and or is there something that like you should probably look at the Wikipedia article real fast to refresh or like get a kind of idea of what's going to happen.
Okay.
Like you don't have to be an
Gotcha.
expert, but be familiar with these things, and also these are potential things that could be uncomfortable for some people.
Okay.
You know, like the TVMA, like the little graphic violence.
Gotcha.
So many urine vectors.
Jokes. Yeah, so many urine vectors. Interesting. But yeah, Vector Man from on the Sega Genesis was never the same.
Yeah.
Might have been Sega Saturn, but yeah. So that L5R.
Just those cat things are really good. Cats is good to like go over. Since I learned about that, like you can find this online somewhere. Just search it, pretty easy. But I feel that's really like a good tool, because I feel most of the games I've been like that I run, and I'm like, oh man, looking back, I made so many mistakes. I could have done so many things better. It's because I didn't set this stuff out ahead of time. Like it would have been really easy, again, just to have a conversation. Like, this is kind of what this game is, what I'm thinking of this game. Should we amend that? Does that work for all the players?
I think that is probably a pretty useful thing to have. I think it also needs to be reiterated pretty regularly, because it's easy to forget some of that some of that information. It's easy to forget that, like, oh, the tone is supposed to be this, and it's also easy to take brief deviations from the tone or from whatever, and instead make that the norm, especially when they're like kind of extreme. So in like a murder mystery, like the Agatha Christie kind of style parlor mysteries, or whatever you want to call it, but like those murder mysteries, like for the most part, there's almost no violence in the story, with the exception of it starts with the lights go out and someone's murdered.
Yeah.
And so it's easy to take the, like, okay, someone got murdered. Well, clearly, regularly, what I need to be doing is bludgeoning people with candlesticks or wrenches or the revolver in the conservatory or whatever it is. And so I think it needs to at times be reiterated of like, this is what this really is about. It deals with a murder, but you guys aren't like murder hobos. You know,
Right.
this is Agatha Christie. This is Murder on the Orient Express. It's not Rambo.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I think that can kind of come up, and really, in the end, it's just a conversation among the people at the table.
Mm-hmm.
So, But yeah.
Yeah, and we kind of that last topic, I think we kind of melded into the other stuff.
Cool. But yeah, man.
Yeah.
So
any closing thoughts here?
I'm glad that I got to run that L5R game kind of to its conclusion, even though it didn't use the L5R system that either was in the box or the system that I got used to playing in high school. I'm glad that I got to use that box set, which I thought was so brilliant. And I still really, really admire all the work that went into it, the gorgeous maps and artwork and all that stuff, and just the detail of coming up with all these characters. There were so many characters you guys never met, but have all of wild. This background. Yeah. I want to find a way in our games to help people with characters' names.
Mm-hmm.
I thought having a book where there was a drawing of them, a description of them, and their name written out would help, but that did not. And everybody would be like, "Who's the one guy with hair? That's it's like blue." It's like that's it.
So many sword boys.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. That please. So where's Big Unicorn? Where's the big unicorn at? Like, fuck, you're gonna make me explode. But I'm very, very glad that we got to run that. I think that game, we also, as many problems as I had with it, we dealt with it more maturely at times than we could have. Nobody became just like a murder hobo. I think that was like I was really, really shocked. One of the dilemmas you have with those kind of things is like Brandon's character Ishii essentially was an unstoppable tank, and he was not particularly violent throughout most of the stuff. And I think there were other people in that situation who would just use that as like, all right, I'm just going to fight everybody, and he didn't. So to his credit, that was good. It fit more with the tone than him just being like, I'm going to murder everyone. So yeah. I'm very, very glad that I ran that game, but I think to toot our horn here, I think it is a very good example of how to and how to not run different aspects of games. I think there are a bunch of missteps that we made that you can learn from, but also a lot of really cool stuff that we did and that happened that you could learn from that too.
Yeah.
And if you can find all 105 examples, send them to us you'll be entered into the drawing for the Dakota ring.
Dakota Fanning ring.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, actually, if anyone, the 3 people listening to this, if there are like suggestions, I would love to hear them. Especially how I played Tayo. I'm interested in that. You can shit on Austin. That'd be fun.
Hey, depends what you ate. But
yeah, that was really fun. It was, I think, pretty sure it was probably the longest like continuous Powered by the Apocalypse game I've played.
Oh, Powered by the Apocalypse for sure. I thought you were going to say the longest game, and I was like, no, we have played longer ones than that.
Yeah.
But we only skipped maybe 2 weeks that whole time. We played that game almost religiously every week.
That's a good point.
And we never had any sessions where we were missing a player. And I'm not a fan of not having all of the players at the table unless like you've come up with stuff in the story for why they're there, why they're gone. But we shockingly had everybody there for all of those sessions. And we played a total of almost 30 sessions. I think it was like 28 or 29 sessions. Plus then we got together and did the debrief. It was impressive.
Yeah.
When you think about it.
The majority of a year.
Yeah, it was a lot. And it's pretty impressive.
I mean, I guess it did help. 2 of the people lived with each other and none of us had lives really.
Right.
So.
Oh yeah, when we did it through the summer, I was much more free. So, all right. Well, on that note,
yeah,
I guess we can wrap stuff up. And
You did a great job there, Austin.
thank you. I've been
Running that whole
practicing.
thing. No, I
Yeah.
really appreciate that. You did a great job as much as I bust your balls. That was a really fun game.
Yeah, I will say with that game, one issue I had with that world was accents. Like I love to do accents. I'm obviously not going to obviously not going to do that in a feudal Japanese world and just do like racist ass Japanese accents.
Well,
But
I
then
really hoped you
beyond
would have learned Japanese for this, but
I
pretty
tried.
depressed.
Yeah, I just couldn't. The Rosetta Stone program wasn't working. No, but I obviously then wasn't going to do other accents and almost like Star Wars prequel styles of like, well, what if everybody from this clan is Irish? Like, like, oh, these people are French. Like that wouldn't make sense either. That'd be kind of goofy. So then it came down to voices, and I ran into the problem of like, okay, well, how can I make these people have distinct voices? And we did a thing which is just, I would try to say like, imagine this person is this actor or this actress. And we still use that pretty regularly today. And I think that can be good, with the one problem of not everybody knows who the hell actors or actresses are. And so, for instance, whenever in the L5R game, I'd be like, imagine this person is so-and-so. And Andrew would be like, who the hell is that? I don't know who you're talking about at all.
Yeah,
And,
Andrew was the worst for that. I'm also pretty bad, but
yeah,
Andrew was always like, I don't know.
Unless they were in a Marvel movie, he had no idea who the person was.
Yeah.
And so, who was it? The woman who's the star of How to Get Away with Murder. Whose name I don't remember. Now I can't remember her name, but I was like, oh, this is the person who would likely play this character. And Andrew was like, who? And you go, oh, the lady from Suicide Squad who was in charge of this. And he was like, oh, of course I know who that is. And it's like, yeah, until you would do that with a Marvel movie or a DC movie, until it was a superhero related thing, he had no fucking idea. But that can happen a lot where it's like not everybody's on the same page. So long story short, stay in school, don't do drugs, and
figure out your actors.
Figure out who actors are. That's a very important skill.
The 3 best pieces of advice.
Stay in school, don't do drugs, and memorize a lot of IMDb.
All right. Well, Austin, go ahead and close this podcast with, of course, the most famous and oft used phrase from L5R that we said every time. Go for it.
Where's my taint?